In the shadows of America's antebellum South, some stories never made it into the history book. Stories whispered in the cabins, feared in the big houses, and buried in the old earth. This is one of them. A tale of a girl born under impossible circumstances, feared by science, protected by her mother, and hunted by the powerful. Some say she was a miracle, others a curse. Tonight, we open the record of the girl science could never explain. Asterisk in 1837 Georgia. The rigid social structure of the plantation South was built upon rules that were never meant to be broken, and one of the most unbreakable was blood. Blood dictated value, status, liberty, and identity. White planters lived at the top and enslaved African people at the very bottom, with no pathway between. Within this world, the birth of a child was never just a private event, it was a political fact, a legal designation, and an unchangeable stamp that placed every human being in a predetermined place. For a child to be born of a slave mother and a plantation daughter, with no man acknowledged and no explanation offered, was something so destabilizing that it threatened not only a family's honor, but the very blueprint of the Southern world. The idea that a child could belong to both worlds, without the sanctioned involvement of a man, created a crack in the social foundation that terrified everyone who understood its implications. Plantation households relied on a myth that white women were pure, untouched, and in need of protection, while enslaved women were considered property, available for labor, punishment, and exploitation. This double standard kept the system functioning, because it divided people by rules that justified both domination and silence. When the planter's 19-year-old daughter was found with a newborn in her arms, the first reaction was panic. Her pregnancy had not been seen, noted, or even suspected. She had been under constant supervision, always surrounded by family, servants, and watchful eyes. A daughter of her station did not simply escape scrutiny. Doctors were summoned immediately, not out of medical concern, but out of the need to defend reputation. Her father could not afford scandal. For a young white woman, giving birth without a husband meant public shame, the collapse of arranged marriage prospects, and unanswered questions that could destroy the plantation's standing among the wealthy elite. When the doctors examined her, they found no signs consistent with a typical pregnancy. It appeared as though she had not carried a child for 9 months. Her body held no changes associated with late gestation. It was as if the newborn had appeared suddenly, with no physical transformation leading up to it. The physicians could provide no explanation that fit the known science of the time. Their confusion deepened when the infant showed features that connected her unmistakably to both the enslaved population and the planter's family. Skin tone that rested between the communities, eyes that resembled the daughter's, and hair texture that linked her to the enslaved maternal line. The enslaved midwives were interrogated, but they insisted they had not delivered the baby and had not known the daughter was pregnant. The young woman herself claimed she had never been touched by a man, and in the deeply religious culture of the South, that claim carried a powerful and unsettling weight. Whispers spread through the plantation as the enslaved workers observed the unfolding drama. With a mixture of fear and knowledge, in slave quarters, folklore and faith often mixed, and the sudden birth of a child unaccounted for by natural means was not without precedent. In the oral histories that had been passed from one generation to another, the overlapping African traditions, Christian reinterpretations, and spiritual warnings created a cultural language that could make sense of what the plantation house could not. Where the doctor saw an impossible anomaly, the enslaved population recognized signs and omens. The night air around the cabin settlements filled with soft conversations about spirits, ancestors, and forces that might intervene in the living world. To them, a child appearing without warning was neither impossible nor unthinkable. It was simply something powerful. Some believed such births signaled change, or a shift in the balance between oppressor and oppressed. Others feared that a child born under such circumstances might carry a burden that could affect everyone connected to her. The planter's family, however, did not have the freedom to interpret the event through folklore. They were trapped by what the law required and what society demanded. and the existence of this child threatened everything they depended upon. Asterisk from the moment the child took her first breath, strange occurrences began to surround her, creating an atmosphere of quiet dread that neither medical reasoning nor plantation logic could explain. In a world where superstition and religion threaded through daily life, every unexplained event took on heavy meaning, and the presence of this infant seemed to upset the natural order in ways that could not be dismissed. The plantation house staff whispered that lamps flickered when she cried, doors shuttered in empty rooms, and the air grew inexplicably colder whenever she was brought near the grand staircase. None of these incidents were dramatic enough to gather public attention, but they were persistent, consistent, and unnerving. The planter's daughter noticed first. She claimed her child often watched things that were not there, her gaze fixed on corners where no sound or movement could be found. The servants who rocked her to sleep refused to stay in the room alone after dark, insisting that the baby's eyes seemed to follow shadows that moved of their own accord. Animals, too, reacted in ways that deepened the unease. The plantation dogs, usually loyal and fearless, would tuck their tails and whine when the infant was carried past them. Horses reared in their stalls whenever the child was in the barnyard. Even the chickens grew restless, scattering wildly whenever her presence came too near. Such behavior did not go unnoticed. In the folklore of the enslaved community, animals were believed to possess sight beyond that of humans, able to detect spirits or disturbances between the seen and unseen worlds. The slaves did not discuss their interpretations with the planter or his wife, but they exchanged cautious glances among themselves, as if silently confirming what they already understood. The baby was not ordinary, and the forces around her were not to be taken lightly. The house doctor, embarrassed by his inability to explain her birth, attempted to rationalize the oddities. He insisted that the servants were overreacting, that the misbehavior of animals could be attributed to weather, instinct, or imagination. Yet, even he found himself unnerved when the girl, barely a year old, appeared to track his movements across a room while his back was turned. He would later confide privately that her eyes felt to knowing, as though she perceived things not visible to others. The pastor, summoned to baptize the infant, hesitated longer than necessary before touching the holy water to her forehead, and even he, a man of scripture, left the house unsettled after hearing the unexplained banging upstairs as the ceremony concluded. As the child grew old enough to toddle, stranger happenings followed. Objects fell from shelves when she passed. Mirrors developed hairline cracks without being touched. Once, a hand-carved cradle rocked for nearly a full minute after she had climbed out of it, with no wind or human contact to cause the motion. Witnesses stood frozen, trying to determine whether they had seen something supernatural or merely the tricks of tired eyes. Whispered speculation grew in the slave quarters that the child had been marked from birth, perhaps chosen by forces older than the land itself, while the planter's wife forbade her servants from repeating such stories under threat of punishment. But control was difficult. Servants could be silenced, but the fear in their faces could not be erased, and the plantation atmosphere grew tenser each passing week. These events did not remain confined to the house. The enslaved workers claimed that nights were different when the child slept. Crickets fell silent, owls avoided the trees near the big house, and the wind seemed to carry a hum so low and deep that it felt more sensed than heard. Some believed ancestral spirits lingered around the girl, drawn to her presence. Others worried she was accompanied by something less benevolent. Over time, the plantation developed an unspoken rule. Everyone pretended nothing unusual was happening, even as the impossible continued to thread itself into the fabric of daily life. The planter, increasingly desperate to protect his reputation, forbade discussion of anything supernatural. All while the line between the ordinary world and something unseen grew thinner around the child. With every passing year asterisk, the truth of the girl's birth was something the plantation tried to bury, long before she could form her first words, because her existence represented a danger that reached beyond superstition and into the fragile political structure that the planter class depended on. If a child could be born of a white woman and carry the features of the enslaved, without a father to name, then every established rule about race, inheritance, and ownership could be questioned. The planter understood this better than anyone. His fortune, reputation, and authority relied on the belief that bloodlines were predictable and controlled.